So, without further ado, my name is Raqueli. Good morning, everyone. I am very excited today to be hosting a panel with these three lovely human beings who I will introduce shortly. So today we're going to talk about regenerative placemaking, which I'll let them explain in a second. But just to give you a little background, Sacbe community has been very passionate about nature and being part of the impact that helps save the world, or at least helps bring in some more light and some more healing into these spaces. And our community, alongside four other communities, created a nonprofit for 4 years called Planet Buyback, where we very adamantly we had different projects signed on to literally help people on the ground that were making this type of change. So that was a really exciting time. And we're still very much always trying to celebrate and learn from people and voices that are still actively doing this and finding new and different ways and tools to better coexist within the majestic nature that we've been gifted. So anyways, today we have the father of this land, Tony Cho, also founder of Future of Cities, which is a great also developmental project. And we have Marat here, Omarov, who is the founder of The Ark, an eco-village in Costa Rica, and Joe Little, also the founder of The Nest, a very special also wellness co-creative space in Los Angeles. So thank you guys for being part of this. And yeah, just to kind of open the space, can you tell us what you feel regenerative placemaking is and how this relates to urban cities versus rural cities?
Absolutely. So I'm Tony Cho. I've met, I think, all of you by now, and the co-steward of this land, along with my wife, Jimena, born and raised here. And the work we're doing here is reconnecting with our ancestors and doing the family work of returning home, but with a renewed idea and vision that integrates and harmonizes with the land instead of compromises. And I think one of my mentors, Bill Reed from Regenerative Institute, which is kind of the foremost authority on regenerative development for 30 years, was one of the kind of founding fathers of the USGBC in green building, says that nature doesn't compromise, nature harmonizes. And I think that's at the core of what regenerative development and then leading into regenerative placemaking is really all about. And I have a personal story with regenerative placemaking because I've been a developer in Miami and South Florida for the last 23 years and have focused on arts districts like the Wynwood Arts District, which I was one of the original pioneers of, and co-founded the Wynwood Business Improvement District, and really started to witness kind of the not so beautiful parts of kind of urban development, the gentrification, the cultural misappropriation, the lack of affordability. The art, of course, is incredibly revitalizing, and also bringing art into the public domain was something that was really powerful about Wynwood. And ultimately private equity groups gobbled up all the land, created it, made it pretty much inaffordable for the small businesses, what we call the butcher, the baker, and the barber of Main Street. And so I started to hold this inquiry around how do we co-create, co-design spaces that are inclusive, that are equitable, that are regenerative for all, and not lose the golden goose of the small independent proprietary business. And so that's really where Future of Cities was born during the pandemic here, and where this combination of regenerative placemaking was born. And it's not something that we have the IP for, but it's something that we've really popularized the last 5 years. And what it's doing is combining the idea of regenerative development practices, which is really goes back to Buckminster Fuller and great thinkers like this, of going beyond sustainability, because sustainability in the status quo is not enough, right? If we just maintain the status quo, we've taken so much more than we've given that we can't sustain it. And so regeneration is about replenishing and revitalizing, and it starts with the self. It starts with the individual. If we can't tend to our inner landscape, the external landscape is never going to be in balance. And then creative placemaking kind of came onto the scene in the 90s and 2000 with kind of the revitalization of Soho in New York with Tony Goldman, and Miami Beach with the Art Deco district. And those were, he and Craig Robbins and others were kind of my mentors in the creative placemaking realm. And they were really using art as a tool to transform real estate. And could you imagine what Miami Beach would look like if they had torn down all those Art Deco buildings and, you know, made these tall monsters everywhere? And I think that is, you know, that history, that connection to the old is also very regenerative, because it's not just wiping clean the historical remnants of what was. And like what we're doing here in this building that's 60 years old is we're honoring the past. That is a regenerative activity. You know, what has been typically done is what we call neocolonialism, where people will go into particularly underserved communities, impose their ideology with the best intentions, right? It's not that you have bad intentions, but completely disconnected from nature and from the community that exists there before. And so I had a lot of experience making a lot of mistakes of how to work with communities, particularly Black and brown communities and underserved communities and opportunity zones, and particularly in Little Haiti, where there was a lot of pushback. You know, as a white male and people who don't know my history or what your intention, we're in a crisis of trust. I was just talking about that with Daniel Pinchbeck. And so to summarize, regenerative placemaking sometimes placemaking can be seen as place taking, right? Because people come in, particularly white male developers, with an idea of what's best for the community, but actually without any concept of co-creation. And so regeneration is about always co-creating, and it's like what nature has evolved to do over millions and millions of years is to create these guilds, these symbiotic guilds of plants that live together, like permaculture, in symbiosis. Humans haven't figured out how to do that. We're really good at othering, but we haven't figured out how to coexist harmoniously, like nature harmonized. We've become an invasive species. So regeneration is the opposite of that, and it goes beyond sustainability. And each of you here is a regenerative placemaker in your own space, in what you do, and it really starts with the internal core and the internal work, the spiritual work, the eco-spirituality, as I call it. But it's in balance with all life, not just human life. So I hope that's somewhat simple to grasp. I am publishing a book on it later next year, and really excited to be in this work with incredible people like on this panel and with all of you, because it's a co-creative experience. You know, regeneration is not an individualistic pursuit, although it also does start with the individual and your heart space and where you are.
I'm glad you mentioned the piece about working with the community that's already there, right? You wanting to expand this vision of how this environment could be more in harmony with nature, right? And I'm curious as to what approach each of you has had when building your specific projects, as to how you felt you were able to, or at least try to successfully integrate the needs and the values of the communities that were already there, to feel kind of their approval, and also just they're wanting to participate.
So first of all, thank you for all the work that you're doing to pioneer this and really kind of educate and share with a lot of us, because I think so many people are wanting to get it right, and in our own work, I think sometimes, you know, we build communities and all of us are making mistakes, learning from them, growing together. The community that I have is an inner city community in the heart of Hollywood. And oftentimes it's, Hollywood in LA is such a transient place. So really working with the people of LA, like there aren't many people that are like from that place, right? We are on Tongva land, and to integrate with a lot of the indigenous communities, not just in LA, but around the world. We've been inviting a lot of them to come, listening from them, learning from them, and also working a lot with the communities that are being created within LA. So I think opening up our space and really inviting in people that are already established and helping to support the communities that they're growing is really important for inner city regenerative living. We've opened up our home underneath the studio. We've really built a native garden. We have our connection to the land really comes from the native plants and the beekeeping that we do there. But really bringing in that kind of like urban setting with somewhat of the kind of like care for the land that we live on. And then also within inviting these individual communities to come and bring the people that they are working with within their community, allows cross-pollination to happen between communities. So it allows the yoga community to connect to more of the medicine community, to connect to the regenerative or the herbal community. And so by sort of creating programming that creates cross-pollination between these groups, we get to share ideas, we get to share resources, and I feel like that creates a great web within the city. Also, by bringing in a lot of the indigenous communities, we've actually been invited in to start helping them and supporting them in some of the schools that they're creating. And we've been collaborating with a really beautiful group down in Brazil called Selvagem that create living schools. They have 5 living schools throughout Brazil that really support the indigenous way of life and the indigenous way of learning. So we've received a number of the elders here at our property in LA. And then a lot of the communities that are working with us in LA help to raise funds to feed back money and resources to them as well. So we're kind of like really trying to work these ways where every time we invite a different community or a different group to come in, we're looking for ways that we can support them, that we're not just like taking the knowledge and the learnings from them, but how do we create a space that enables the work that we're doing to be able to feed and nourish the work that they're doing. And, what Tony's doing here is really expansive and really beautiful. It's like takes a lot of resources. And I feel that one of the reasons that I'm here is that, we just started doing it from our home. We created a space in our garden and started building community right where we are. And I think that sometimes when we think about building communities, we look at them as being like these really like big and complex and expensive things that we have to start, these big projects. And I feel that all of us can foster that in our own homes, and all of those can begin to create community exactly where we are with the resources we have, by opening our hearts, by opening our lands, by including the people around us, by asking people around us like, hey, what do you need? What do you want to create? How can we create together? And I think that, like we have many different scales along this panel, and starting small does not mean small in the heart. It can be big in the heart, and then from there we can kind of go on to create these networks. So thank you.
I want to hear how it was in Costa Rica, because that is also a tremendous project, and in the middle of the jungle with native people also around, but also just such I feel such a mission-driven type of project, especially now with our generation that we're starting to really not only dream it, but we're starting to see it, right? Like these eco-villages of places that you can imagine being around, the types of people that really elevate your soul and your spirit and make you feel like you're creating an environment that is truly safe and that really can hold all these roots that we've been in time disconnected from, right? With all the commodities and the technologies that have helped, but have also pushed us away from getting hands dirty, right? So I'm curious as to how you went about that introduction there, or what brought you actually to Costa Rica and do it there.
Hi guys, my name is Marat, nice to meet you. Let's spice it up. What Tony already said was regeneration, right? It's like more than sustainability. What do you think requires regeneration nowadays? You can just start saying. Like what do we need regeneration in? Culture? Agriculture, yeah, for sure, definitely. Nature. What else?
The human body.
Human body, yeah. Anything else? The way we work. Yeah, businesses, right? Yeah. Anything else? Healthcare? Sorry? Capital. Yeah. Money relationship. Yeah. Anything else? Relationships. Human relationships. Healthcare. How we take care of our health. Yeah. Education. Do you think we need another systems for education? Like how we're raising our kids? Hell, it's crazy. No, everything we practically named, almost everything of our like how we're interacting with the world. Everything is not working. We all understand in this room that like everything needs regeneration. Whenever we talk about regenerative practices, we're conditioned to think about nature, about like agriculture or something, and it's normal, right? It's because like it feels that it's the most drained. But actually, we are drained, and the system and capitalism, we spoke yesterday in the sauna. We spoke yesterday about capitalism, like what capitalism is serving, right? If it's capitalism is working, and then you said amazing thing, like capitalism is working for the purposes of capitalism. And purposes of capitalism is to make few people rich. And it's working, great. But it's not working for everyone, it's not working for nature, it's extractive systems and everything. So that's what we're doing, right? We all kind of feel that regeneration is required. We all feel that it's needed. It's not anymore something that's just like, oh, it's a hippie idea. Hell no, it's something like we are saving kind of in a sense the world. And when I was saying this intention when we were doing it yesterday, right? That's what I also meant, that we have to be healthy, we have to be strong in order to be these light warriors that we are. So the project that we are doing in Costa Rica called the Ark, the name was not the Ark, but as the Ark, as a boat. And it was born in 2021. I was living in Tulum. I'm from Kazakhstan myself. I was living in Tulum. I love Tulum with all my life, all my love and like all my heart. And unfortunately, unconscious developments, drug cartels, corruption, and so many other factors took away the Tulum, the magic of Tulum that it was, and made it a party capital of the world. And seeing what pandemic did to us as well, how we were taking away the freedom that we had, how choices that we were supposed to be making for ourselves, out of nowhere the government started doing for ourselves, how we were supposed to live. And it was just 2 years ago. The world was ending just 2 years ago. We just very quickly forgot about it. The governments just opened the borders and like, hey, we can travel again, forget about it, that was great. But actually it happened 2 years ago. And for me, in 21, I was like, no, I have to go and find a land where we can set up an example of how can we make things differently. And hell no, there was no this kind of idea from the very beginning, like, oh, let's do it a complete regenerative thing. I was just like, no, let's just like go and figure it out. And Costa Rica was always ringing the bell. And I found a new home in Santa Teresa. And Santa Teresa is a very small surf town in Nicoya Peninsula, which is one of 5 blue zones. And we are 200-acre property with 60-acre jungle, 15-acre permaculture farm. And we decided to tackle all these things that you named, which require regeneration inside of the project. We are the project that has no investors. So I invested all my capital, and now everybody who are purchasing the land inside of the Ark are also becoming owners of the Ark. So we are creating this regenerative model where we are benefiting from all the businesses that we are creating together inside. People who are purchasing land at the Ark, they're also starting working with the Ark. So they're joining the team in whatever extent they want, whatever they want to do as team leaders, as supporters, as educators, as doctors, as you name it, like whatever. And the thing is that I recently had this interesting meeting with a person who was doing project in Italy, and he said, and he's like from the old world, he was a head of the board of Remy Martin, and he said like, so how did you do this? And I'm like, what? He's like, how did you do this that people are paying you the money and they're working for you? And the idea is that they're not working for me, they're working for ourselves. We are together making this village. I'm not gonna take more space of it because I know there are more questions, but I'll be happy to share more and more in the further questions. Thank you.
No, we are very interested in learning about all of this. One of the things I find very interesting about the differences in all these developments that we see happening now that are very much taking into consideration in the blueprint nature is, you know, there is also at the pace that we're going, and like the way I see it, it's like we're in these two timelines, right? Like in this very organic timeline and a very like inorganic timeline. So it's like there's the people that, you know, there's like these high rises that now have all this technology and all these beautiful gadgets, and it's amazing, and I'm very fascinated by it as well. But then, you know, then these projects that are very much like connecting and working with mud and doing, you know, and so I'm curious because there will always be naysayers, right? You know, because some see one thing as, you know, as progress in what man can make, you know, and others see it as maybe going back, right? But more speaking in these terms of like the psychological and emotional well-being, right, aspects, it's like, what are these changes that can be tangible of people living in these types of environments, of regenerative developments?
Thank you, Raquelita. And I think it's an important segue, but I want to go back to, you know, what Marat and Joe talked about, because firstly, regeneration, there's no such thing as too small for regeneration, because it starts with yourself. So the most regenerative act is to love yourself. So that's one, and then love your neighbor, and then it expands beyond that. Also, as someone who grew up in a commune where not only everybody worked for free, taught the schools, they didn't have ownership. And there's certain things about that was not regenerative and not sustainable. And so I love hearing your evolution of the model. And what you're essentially doing is very important, is creating a guild. You know, guilding is very important. That's what plants do in nature naturally. They have guilds that work in symbiosis. What we're doing here with the artisan market and the makers village is supporting small businesses. That's very regenerative. The most impact you can do for a community is support local small businesses and create a circular economy. And that's the vision of what we're doing here at ChoZen. And we are going to see an advancement and a quantum leap, in Deepak Chopra's words 2 weeks ago at the Hub. The next 20 years, probably the next 5 years, is going to be what we saw between 1885 and 1905. If you were stuck on an island in 1885, there was no plane or no cars. 1905, there are planes and cars. So we're going to see that with AI, and many people are scared, you know, and many people are skeptical. There's also the possibility to eradicate many diseases. Is that good? Is it bad? We're all evaluating all of those things. But we do know there's going to be quantum advancements in what's happening. And, you know, I love what Marat is talking about in terms of creating, basically it's a regenerative commune where there's co-ownership, and it has to go beyond the capitalistic model. because, or else it doesn't function, and there's not this concept of regenerosity or reciprocity. And it's like what Sacbe is doing, is creating a community that's beyond transactional exchange. We have to go, if we want to evolve capitalism, we have to stop being transactional. And regenerative is the opposite of transactional, it's relational, right? And so there's no exact right model for regenerative communities. It's what works in the place. And when you get back to place-based development, you have to understand the context, the history, and the people of place. And guess what? You know, I had a lot of missteps and difficulties in working in Little Haiti. And there were at least 2 or 3 dozen people who raised their hand and said they were the community leaders that represent the interests of that community. So there's a lot of corruption. And you have to be intelligent enough to develop your intuition to know what's real and not real. And just because somebody's wearing a headdress and they say they're indigenous does not mean that they represent the interests of all indigenous people. Same thing with underserved communities. And so we have to be really careful about generalizations. And so a community is organic. And so there is no, well, our culture is better or more vibrant than yours. It's really how are we co-designing, but with all of the information and the technologies available to us. So for me, I get crap sometimes because I develop, Future of Cities is really focused on the built environment, not just urban environments. And primarily we're working in underserved communities. Of course, we're developing ChoZen as a model, but this is a bioregional hub. So it's supposed to be a resource for the entire state, for the entire region on regenerative systems, on small business incubation, arts and crafts, music and culture, all of those things that are important, but many people perceive these types of development as exclusive or inaccessible. And even my own family growing up, in the ashram, are you guys gonna put a velvet rope up? Are you gonna have VIP wristbands? Trauma. I was a nightclub promoter in very exclusive clubs in the 90s. And so those are real concerns and something to be mindful of. And it has to be inclusive if it's going to be regenerative, but it has to also make sense. And there has to be, the exchange is not only financial, right? Everybody has something to contribute, whether it's their ideas, their talents, their time, their treasure. And there does need to be leadership. What we say, what we're building here is a community of leaders, not followers. And most people are conditioned to follow. And that's okay, but it's about the intention of the leadership. And so if the intention is pure, then usually what follows can be organic and pure. And so I don't believe in horizontal development because there's no form of regenerative development where you cut down the forest. The most regenerative thing you can do is conserve the forest. And so for me, vertical development in an intelligent, smart density is what we need to do if we want to continue to grow the population. If we want to shrink the population to half, then we can talk about restructuring our urban context. But it's about rewilding our minds and our hearts first, and then bringing that knowledge into the cities in what we call indigenous 7th-generation planning, where we're not just planning for the next fund cycle, which is 5 to 7 years, because that's how profit works. It's a 5 to 7 year cycle. That's not how nature works. These trees are hundreds of years old, and in China, the tea trees are thousands of years old. So we're on a different timeline. Nature's on a different timeline than the stock market.
Thank you. That's, I think for me, the cities are the past. And why do we have to live in the cities, or why we had to live in the cities? Because cities gave us work. That was the only reason why we were gathering in the cities. And I think what the work of regenerative cities and placemaking in the cities, it's great because then it's kind of repurpose the idea of living in the cities. But at the same time, let's not forget, whenever you come to New York, and there are people from New York here, you're stressed because you see no trees. You are not meant to live in the concrete jungle. We're meant to live in nature, and we are nature. We're part of nature, we're part of the whole ecosystem, and the disconnection that we have is the result of the system that was working to disconnect us. And it made a great job. And you have to see the faces of the people who are getting back to nature, and not just into nature to visit nature, but nature is a place to live, right? So like when you come to live in nature and the struggles people are having, and then you understand how far we are from nature. So I believe we belong to nature, to be living there, to understanding the cycles, not to read about it, to feel about it. We all are following certain spiritual knowledge here, right? And then we were just having a conversation with my friend at the breakfast about it, that you have certain experiences when you know something, and then when you experience it, it's a very different thing. But then if you know, then it's like, you embody the knowledge. And when you come to live to nature, you embody the knowledge of being a part of it. And of course, it's a long story, right? Like there are developments, and this is very important, not to confuse things. And this word developer, which definitely has a negative connotation now, right? It's like, and whenever I talk about the architect, the last thing I'm a real estate developer. I'm not a real estate developer. I will never be a real estate developer. We bought a cattle farm that was deforested 50 years ago by Costa Ricans because of the overconsumption of beef in the United States. Costa Rica deforested a lot of forests in the 80s, and they made them like grazing fields, and they were cattle raising farms. And now Costa Rica is coming back into because they're the country that retropicalizing their pasture fields. So we bought the pasture field that was 50 years, and our productive layer of our soil is less than 1 centimeter. You cannot grow anything in that soil. It was interesting also for me to walk, because I was like, wow, how are you growing anything here? we were like in the very beginning when we started the farm, our project started from the farm. And it's not like a walking farm, it's like a 15-acre in one spot. And we just started digging and hoping to find any soil. And there was none. So all the processes that are happening here, I understand the challenges, and it's incredibly complicated. But then you start working with nature, and then you see when we just started the project in 2022, we had 15 types of different types of plants and trees on 200-acre property. Now we have more than 400. We have more than 40 different species of birds and animals who came back. We have animals that I never heard in my life, and they're coming back, and you see them on site, and it's insane. We have deers coming back. We have like little jaguars coming back. And then, so how do you start living together with this nature? How do you become part of this nature? How do you adopt what you're doing? So I think it's truly like in this slowing down, and that's what you said as well, right? Like I really love this, like slow hospitality. And our communication manager, she has a tattoo here on her hand. It says slow. And that's what Costa Rica definitely teaches you. Nothing works. Nothing works. It's pura vida. Like people don't work, people don't show up, people don't respect agreements. They're like, yeah, pura vida, bro. And then, I come from the very structured, I've been doing huge projects in Kazakhstan, and from a very structured like timelines and everything. You cannot, at least before I was thinking so, like you cannot do large projects without timelines. Apparently you can. You're just like, yeah, okay. There are non-straight works in Costa Rica. Everything is like this. I don't know if you've been. And it's just like whatever would take you from here to like Fort Lauderdale. I was driving like it's 170 miles. And I drove it in 2 hours. 170 miles is Costa Rica from one side to another. And you drive it for 10 hours. And I was driving, and I was like, we have no Amazon. We deliver. Amazon is deliveries. We have no deliveries, let's say so. And then we're driving like on these like curved lines, and I was like, at one moment I was like, hell, if everything would be working faster, it would be so different. And then I stopped, and I was like, actually, you know what? Then it would be just another country. And we all love, in a sense, whoever been or whoever hasn't been, but we all have this certain space in our hearts for Costa Rica. It's kind of like this dream that we always hear, like 98% of renewable energy, 4% biodiversity of the world, like no army and blah, 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 all these things that Costa Rica is famous for. And it's also famous for this slow living. And you don't realize it. Whenever you're coming for a week to surf, you don't realize it because, like, you just came for a week. Whenever you live there for 3-4 months, and then it starts like, wow, it starts being so uncomfortable, it breaks you. It breaks you so much that after a year, you're either great with it and you're rolling with nature, you're rolling with Pura Vida, you're rolling with local community. Like, they're like, yeah, bro, you're not showing up for the work that I paid you for, no problem, whenever. But then there are like very human reasons, and then you start listening to it. There is no like, I paid you, you have to show up tomorrow at 9. He's like, no, like, listen, my car broke and the mechanic didn't show up, and then this happened and that happened, so I'll come in 5 days. You're like, sure, take your time. And then you're like, guys, we don't have a machine for next 5 days, so we have to rechange the plans. But then you're like, okay, but that's just life, like, what is also these blue zones where we are in Nicoya Peninsula, like in Netflix, he made this show now about blue zones and popularized it a little bit. First 3 episodes are great, then it converts into the capitalistic model that he's like, I'm making a new blue zone by there. And I was like, oh my God. But the first is great, and this is like, what unites all blue zones is the community, the food, of course, right? Like, they all live in nature, but it's also like constant moving. That's what they always do. It's not about going to the gym, moving to the gym with an escalator, working out for an hour, coming down with an elevator, sitting in your car and driving. It's like you're constantly working. You're constantly working on the land, you're doing something. The amount of steps that we're doing, the amount of calories that we're burning just by being there, it's insane. So it's a very slow approach to life. It's a very slow approach to development, to hospitality, to friendship, to life. It's just like, there is no meeting for lunch. You don't meet anyone for lunch. You go and you just hang out on the beach all day. And then like after a day, you're like, wow, that was really cool. That was really like you built something. And that's what we're doing here, right? It's like a week when you're like, we're all meeting and we're talking, and you have the generosity of time when you can dedicate it to the like slow conversations in the sauna about capitalism and regenerative models and like community building. So yeah, so that's about my take so far after 3 years of living in Costa Rica nonstop.
Thank you. So I think we were kind of also talking about like how we live in a different way, like how these regenerative places are so different from these like hyper-technological spaces. And I kind of see like these regenerative places almost like a portal that takes you back to the earth, takes you back to kind of like an original way of being. And these sort of like technological spaces kind of almost like take you into these kind of like future sort of mindset spaces that, how can the human mind imagine all of these things? How can we have like all of the lights that change the colors, just like the speech of our voice, or whatever the things that our mind can create in technology. But these regenerative spaces kind of come back to like the original way of being. And they're not kind of like a figment of the human imagination, but it's like part of really like the way that nature like lives. It's part of the original instruction. It's part of the like the universal laws. It's like, we live in symbiosis. We listen to the land. We understand what the land needs. We work out the watersheds. We understand the way that it grows. We listen to the soil and what it needs. And we try to work in some ways in symbiosis with that. And I also see them like portals, like in inner city centers, because people they come to these spaces to kind of be transported. They come to these spaces to kind of like learn, to understand. And we bring people, like I know Tony brings people from all over the world here. And probably people that would never have access to this kind of information, never have access to this wisdom. They can travel 2 hours from Miami, come here, and they can be transported somewhere totally different, with a different mindset, with a different way of being. And so the importance of these places, like whether they be rural, whether they be here, or whether they be like the Nest in the middle of one of the megatropolises of the world, they take people places. And then the beautiful thing is, like, you know, the three of us sitting here, it's like then we create a network within ourselves. And so, like, how do those regenerative spaces create roots? And then, like the mycelium network, how do we connect together so that we can share the wisdom that Tony's sharing here? Maybe some of those teachers can come to my place or your place or other places. And rather than it being in competition with one another, like, oh, he has a wellness space and I have a wellness space, I want my wellness space to do better than his, or whatever the mindset is in like the capitalist way of being. It's like what we've been doing in LA is finding other similar like-minded spaces and connecting with them. And then when we have elders, when we have teachers come through, reaching out to them and actually offering and actually sharing that network with them and creating like roots for the teachers to be able to like share in other places, so that we kind of feel like that we're all working together. Because I think that the mindset has been like the old set mindset is like, we want to do best. And I tell you how we do best. It's like one of my sayings is like, we all know the social climbers, right? The people that want to be with the successful people. They want to be like, you know, in those spaces, in those rooms. And I always said, like, you know what the best way to have successful friends is to help your friends be successful. And so, like, you know, then you all grow together, you all rise together, and you're like, remember when we were just starting out and we were just in that place? And it's like, now look at Sacbe and how incredible it's grown. And I'm sure you share that together. And so it's like, it's about creating those spaces, building them, having roots, having integrity, having honesty, and then finding other people like-minded and helping them to be more successful, helping their spaces to thrive. And so I see like the technology wants to be like the thing that grows and is always the best of the best. And I see that the way that we grow as nature and in symbiosis with one another is always supporting one another. So I think in some ways a regenerative space is a space where other people can feel safe and they can feel encouraged, and the nature around us doesn't feel like it's in competition with us, that it also feels supported, that it feels nourished and it feels nurtured. So yeah, it's a heart set and a mindset. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, guys. Well, just to close now, which this already opened up my brain in many directions, but I think the last thing on my mind was with also these advancements. There's a lot of smart cities happening now in different parts of the world, and if we can adapt that idea to what you guys are doing, right? What is that, you know, vision or advice for other people out there trying to create these types of safe havens or regenerative spaces, as to how they can scale in a way that also feels that other parts of the world are receiving this type of medicine without feeling, you know, disillusioned.
It's funny you bring that question. I didn't read all the questions, but a lot of people ask me about smart cities, and I'm not an engineer or technologist. I'm a practitioner, regenerative practitioner, and so I actually wrote an article on wise cities versus smart cities, because technology is just a tool, right? It's a piece. It should be working for humanity and for nature. And so I think we should look to embrace this concept of a wise city over a smart city, because smart city is just applying, you know, it's just implying technology, software and hardware. But really, you know, wisdom needs to be integrated into the built environment. And a lot of it comes from the indigenous. And so 7th generation planning is a big fundamental concept of Future of Cities platform for regenerative placemaking, and it's really looking at the previous 3 generations for direction for the present and for the future 3 generations, and not to do anything without thinking of your actions having an impact. And so I think that's really important. I love the technological advancements, particularly, again, what's happened with smart homes and smart technology is it only goes to the 1% because it's unaffordable. Kind of like the organic food movement, the environmental movement, it became inaccessible. For something really to be successful, it has to be accessible to all. We have to eliminate the green premium. You know, sustainability is not sexy. Doing less harm is not sexy. So I think that we need to have a movement that everybody can be part of, you know, the 99%, and that's really what we're focused on the Wise City concept. And I think going back to this urban versus rural, I don't think it's urban versus rural, it's yes and, because there's so much existing infrastructure. I would be cautious about new cities coming out of the desert, but I think we have billions of square feet and meters of dilapidated old infrastructure, primarily in underserved communities like garages, which will be obsolete in 10 or 20 years, that can be repurposed to offices or vertical farming or whatever. But don't just throw away the baby with the bathwater. Look at this, you know, trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure that's being wasted. I mean, in Florida, we now have the Brightline, which is using the Henry Flagler rail to be a private enterprise built a high-speed train in Florida. It's one of the only in the US. Europe has it, China has it. It's very efficient. You need the infrastructural pieces to have a sustainable regenerative community. And so I think that is really important. There has to be bioregional planning, because what's happening in Florida is suburban sprawl. People think they're living in nature, but they're chopping down the forest, planting invasive species, non-native exotic species, planting Bermuda grass, and then using tons of water, and it's just complete insanity. And it's like an insidious suburban development, and people think that they're environmentalists, and they're not. And so we have to manage and we have to plan the development of cities in conjunction with bioregional planning, from transportation to education to all of it. And most of the underserved communities in this country are living in inner cities. And so it's important work to bring nature to them or bring them to nature. And I think that's what happened. And your buddy Dan Buettner from Blue Zones was here 2 weeks ago, and he had the time of his life at one of our artisan markets. And he said that this is a blueprint for a blue zone in Florida, because it incorporates all of these aspects of what you guys are doing in Costa Rica and what's happening in specific places where people are walking everywhere, living close to nature, growing their own food, talking to strangers, connecting. That's regenerative. Whether it's a blue zone or regenerative community, we can call it many different things. It's just about true, authentic connection to your own nature and to the nature that's around you.
Thank you. I think after such panels, there's always a lot of information, and there is very little, like, so what do I do, right? Like, what am I doing? And it's regeneration. It's such a word that I hope won't create the same backdrop as sustainability, because we all like got poisoned already by this word sustainability or eco or conscious. We were like, oh my God, eco-sustainable conscious development. And you're like, oh my God, where can I throw up? So let's not, we don't have many words left. Let's not ruin regeneration. Regeneration is truly beautiful. It's what nature is doing. It's a natural thing. And what we all can do naturally is taking away from this experience is what you are already doing, is just like educating ourselves and growing from inside and being mindful, being self-aware what we're doing, self-aware about the consumption, about like the way we're living, the way how we want to spend time. And while our higher purpose in the arc, as we defined it, is to be the blueprint for new and existing communities and projects around the globe to truly embrace these principles of regeneration and shared prosperity. And I want to finish this one with we all heard of the name of Charles Darwin, right? I hope so. And he said, remember what he said, like the most famous phrase, right? Like that survival of the fittest, right? Have you ever heard of the name Alfred Russel Wallace? No. Alfred Russel Wallace is actually, he wrote the Evolution of Species, the same practical work as Charles Darwin, practically at the same time. And he was passing away in, I don't remember where. And Charles Darwin, for him, he was just like, wow, this is my idol. So he sends his work to Darwin. And it's all documented. We don't know this story, and it's fascinating. And Darwin, when he received the work of Wallace, he sends it to the British Scientific Society, and he attaches a note that he says, wow, this work is completely amazing. It's very much what I'm doing. I'm gonna make this guy as a co-author of Evolution of Species. So Alfred Russel Wallace is a co-author. Alfred Russel Wallace was from the very low kind of society, underprivileged society. He was just doing what he was doing because he loved it. Darwin was, how did you call it? White privileged male. White privileged male. And so of course, British Scientific Society could not afford Alfred Russel Wallace to be the first one. So Charles Darwin is written in big letters, and Alfred Russel Wallace written in small letters. And then the only thing Darwin said that is a difference between my work and Wallace's work, that Wallace wrote, survival of the species is built on cooperation. And British Scientific Society changed it to survival of the fittest. And that's what we all learned in school. And that's how we're programmed from so long ago, that we have to be the strongest, that we have to push one another to survive. But truly, if you think about it, if survival is built on cooperation, then everything changes, right? So let's just cooperate and be co-creating together. Oh!
I want to take it back to something that you said, Tony, and that's like how that there is no act, there is no way that regeneration can be like too small, and that how that it really starts in our hearts. And I like to think of my life, and then I always say I'm a qualitarian, right? Like if I want to eat, I'm not like a vegetarian or a carnivore. I want the best of everything, but also in my life, like I really love the way that the oils I put on my body, I want to be made by somebody that I know. Like the clothes, I want to be made by people that I know. Like I know that like the acts of regenerative living can be things that we can bring into our life. They don't have to be something that you have to create a huge project or build something. It can be like how we actually spend our energy, our time, our mind. Like we can shop at the farmer's market. We can, share food with a neighbor. We can, just have awareness in the world around us and how we're living and how we're actually sharing our lives. Because I think that sometimes we think about these things and we see them as these like mega projects. But if we can just like bring everything back to the small, like the acts of the way that we're living, I think that we can all work out how to live a little bit more regeneratively and how we can kind of leave things better than we find them. So, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.